It is 5:02 right now. The top 10 Democratic presidential candidates taking center stage in prime time right here in Atlanta. The presidential hopefuls tackling a range of topics from universal health care to immigration. All of this, of course, taking place at the new Tyler Perry Studios, and that's where we find Christy Etheridge this morning with a breakdown of the big night. Christy.
It was a big night. Good morning, Sheba. The first thing to note is that the crowd behaved very well. They were silent for almost the first hour of the debate. That's nearly unheard of. Now, all of the candidates got a chance to talk last night. That meant when the crowd was quiet, we got a chance to hear as much as possible from the candidates. They tackled just about everything, but no one seemed to have a major breakout moment. They started right off the bat, reacting to the public impeachment hearings. Senator Kamala Harris even calling President Trump a, quote, criminal in the White House. Bernie Sanders calling him, quote, the most corrupt president in modern history. But a large portion of the debate was spent talking about Medicare for all. Of course, they also dove into immigration and education. We caught up with several of the candidates after the debate to hear them elaborate on their views a little more.
My focus is on bringing down the cost of college, but really matching the jobs that we have out there and we know we're going to have out there with our education system.
I'm excited that Georgia is turning purple, but I will say that most voters are more concerned with your vision for the country and how you're going to improve their lives and less about your particular background, in my experience.
This was another opportunity to reach out and connect with black voters who I can tell are still getting to know me and sizing me up. That means not only explaining the what, the policies like our Douglas plan for Black America that is about tearing down systemic racism, creating not just economic opportunity, but greater access to justice, housing, education, health, and voting.
I'm running for president is to pass comprehensive immigration reform with a pathway towards citizenship. In my first days in office, I will also, by executive order, renew the DACA protection.
Now, of course, we didn't have a chance to talk to everyone, including the three candidates who are polling the highest right now, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren. But we have much more from each candidate online, and we'll have more of a debate wrap coming up in the next hour.
What are your first impressions of what you heard from these 10 tonight, based on maybe the other debates you've listened to? What was different about this debate, and what did you like, not like about it?
So, this is the first debate I've physically been to in a long time. And I thought it was a very good opportunity to hear a combination of points of view from candidates. And I think that it's hard for me to figure out who won, because I liked a little bit of everything. It was like a smorgasbord of ideas.
Anyone who resonated with you, anything in particular on an issue that stuck out in your mind that you
well, let me say this much. I think that, I think Cory Booker and Kamala Harris did very well. I think Elizabeth Warren did what she normally does. I think Bernie Sanders did. And I like just about everybody. There's not a candidate up there that I couldn't say, okay, if this candidate becomes a nominee, that I would be willing to support whomever that is. I think they have to demonstrate that they can garner support throughout America, starting with Iowa and New Hampshire and those states.
Is anything about what they had to say regarding issues important to Georgians? A little bit of the farm issue came up, the abortion question came up. Georgia was mentioned a couple of times in the debate, trying to focus their attention on maybe what Georgians in particular are listening to and wanting to hear, needing to hear.
And I think that's very prevalent, particularly the issue about the right to choose, and what Georgia has done that is probably not reflective of what Georgia totally feels. That's what the elected body, which happens to be a Republican majority, has chosen to do. I'm not sure that that's where the public is. And I think, it's very interesting that we've taken a position, and particularly men. I have a personal view, and I think that the right to choose is in the hands of a woman, not me as a man. So, and I also think it's interesting that the Republican Party talks about less government, but yet the government has taken a stand here that says you don't have a right to choose. So,
to the degree that these candidates spoke to issues that are important to African Americans and other minorities in this country, do you think they're in touch? Do you think they're really having a good idea of what is needed from them out there in this country and in Georgia in particular?
Well, I think they're learning. I mean, going through a campaign process is a learning experience. And I think, for example, I know that Mayor Pete and Senator Sanders had sessions at, I think, Clark AU Morehouse, the two of them. I think Elizabeth Warren is at Clark AU. So I think the candidates are listening and hearing, and have been listening and hearing. And so they are certainly speaking to issues that impact communities of color.
So is that what you would expect? Is that better or worse than what you've seen in recent Democratic races?
I think it's better.
In what way?
I think it's better. I think it's better because, at some point, it's not just taking a vote for granted. It is about inclusion, and there are people who are brought to the table who are part of the process of deciding how the issues are going to be addressed and what the solutions are. I mean, these are real solutions that really don't just totally focus on one community. They focus on the entire community, so it helps the entire community, but it happens to also, in many cases, is disproportionately represented in communities of color, so it helps those communities significantly.
And I'll wrap up here, but Kamala Harris mentioned, well, a lot of times he'll show up at the black churches on Sundays and then forget about us the rest of the year, and she made a point of saying that there has to be a commitment that lasts, that is year-round, that is ongoing.
And I think that is representative of all candidates. I certainly believe the major candidates, and I think that these candidates are doing that. I see that as happening. It's been a process, but it is happening. Okay, thank you.
First of all, welcome to Atlanta. I hope that you all have enjoyed our great Southern hospitality. I thought tonight was so important for the South in general, and I think it really speaks to the fact that people see that Georgia is in play. And I thought that as the Vice President was able to showcase where he's been for so many years on the world stage, and it's increasingly important that people remember that and recognize that his leadership and stability is what we need now. We need a leader who is able to come in on day one and restore respect for the United States of America. I think that case is made today by the Vice President, and he has reminded so many of us on why he is the one to beat Donald Trump.
Absolutely. We'll take a couple questions, guys.
Mayor, there was a moment tonight where Joe Biden, former Vice President Joe Biden, really spoke in clear terms about the issue of the lock him up chance. And it seemed that he was, to your point, trying to strike and restore a more presidential tone to the White House. He made a comment about tweeting as well. How important will that tone be for whomever becomes the Democratic presidential nominee?
I think it's extremely important. Joe Biden is a statesman. And I think, my concern, I look at my youngest children who are 9 years old, it's my concern that they don't know and will remember a time when the president was a man to be respected. And I am glad that Joe Biden is reminding the nation of that we are a country of respect and civility, and he made that case, and just by virtue of who he is, he reminds us of that each and every day.
Mayor Bottoms, you are one of the few high-profile Georgia Democrats to step out and endorse someone in the presidential race so far. Why do you think you're one of the few?
Well, I think probably because I'm pretty brave. And I think that this is not a conventional year. In a conventional year, you wait and you lick your finger, you stick it up, and you see which way the wind is blowing. We don't have time for that this year. I've known from day one that Joe Biden was a strong candidate, but as we got into the course of the campaign, it became increasingly clear to me that he was the strongest candidate and our best chance of beating Donald Trump. And we don't have time to waste. We don't have time to continue to bicker amongst each other. I think the sooner that we consolidate the fields, I think the better chance the Democrats will have to take back the White House in 2020.
There are a couple of surrogates already talking about the moment when former Vice President Joe Biden said that there was only one African-American senator who has supported him what they're saying, at least what we've been hearing already, is that he forgot. He's forgetful. That's starting to be spun a little bit even here. It's been moments after the debate. What do you all make of that moment, and how should people take it?
I think it's silly season. I think that it was very clear that he was talking about the first African American woman. He was there when Kamala Harris was sworn in, so clearly he knows that there's another African American woman. But when you're talking in 1 minute and 15-minute sound bites, it's difficult before he even had an opportunity to correct himself. Or it's in the same way that I'm sitting here struggling for words. It happens sometimes, but it's difficult when you're on a stage and people are making assumptions about what it's about. I mean, he was speaking about the first African American woman senator. He's very clear on who Senator Kamala Harris is.
Mayor, Georgia, African American women tonight being in Atlanta. You're an African American mayor of a city, of a major city, and tonight they wanted to highlight African American women as being the backbone of this party. What does that mean to you?
Well, I think it speaks volumes that we're here on the grounds of Tyler Perry Studios, that we are in the city of Atlanta. And I think that black women across the state have shown that we can influence elections. And I was glad to hear that articulated on the stage tonight.
Two more questions.
What's your reaction to Cory Booker's marijuana comment?
Which comment tonight? There were so many comments tonight.
Well, he criticized Joe Biden for his position, what he thought his position was on marijuana, and he said he wondered if he was high.
Well, I mean, again, they're sound bites. They're speaking in sound bites. So, and I have a great deal of respect for Senator Booker, but he's speaking in sound bites. Just so in a moment like this, you'll stand here and ask me about it.
And I just want to assert on that point to underscore the mayor's comments. They're speaking in sound bites, and Vice President Biden was very clear where he did stand on the issue of marijuana. He came out forcefully and said no one should be in jail for drug use only. He said that marijuana should be decriminalized, that folks' his records should be automatically expunged, that it should be rescheduled, and frankly that they should also be studied so we can know the long-term effects that marijuana has. And so I think Vice President Biden put it to rest, and as the mayor said, it's silly season out there, and so folks are, looking for their moment on the debate stage. But we think, to your question earlier, that Vice President Biden had a strong showing on the debate stage tonight. He hit his commander-in-chief's points and leaned all the way in, and I think the American people saw why he's ready to step into the Oval Office on day one.
You said that Georgia's in play. What's it going to take for a presidential candidate to flip Georgia?
I think that we have to have the resources here, and I think we have to register more people to vote, and then we have to turn out and vote. We have the numbers here to make this state a blue state. So I think with just a little more support in this state, I think that it can happen. We saw how close we came just last year.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody.
An effective argument on health care?
Pardon?
Do you think Vice President Biden made an effective argument on health care, Senator Warren?
I do. It's very clear where the vice president stands on that. As a part of the Obama-Biden administration, we were able to achieve the Affordable Care Act, and he's talked about his expansion of the Affordable Care Act. I don't think that many people are interested in us starting from scratch, and that's essentially what we'll have to do if we follow Medicare for All plan.
According to the Los Angeles Times, over the last hour, more than 6.5 million people tuned in for last night's Democratic debate here in Atlanta. Those are the lowest national numbers of any of the Democratic debates. And several candidates have stayed around town, spending much of the day in our city.
They talked a lot about voter suppression, an issue that Georgia Republicans say does not exist. 11 Live's Doug Richards explains both views. Doug?
Well, Cheryl, voter suppression became a catchphrase in last year's election for governor after the Secretary of State wiped hundreds of thousands of names from the voter rolls and then got elected governor. Republicans say that only told part of the story, but don't tell that to Democrats.
I think we're going to have to overcome their voter suppression in every way possible.
When Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, Cory Booker, and Andrew Yang visited Ebenezer Baptist Church the morning after they debated, they found a room full of volunteers trying to reach potential voters to make sure they're registered in Georgia. And when Stacey Abrams entered the room, it erupted into applause. Abrams was the candidate who made voter suppression an issue when she ran and barely lost the race for governor last year.
Stacey would be the governor right now were it not for voter suppression.
That's Joe Biden, also in Atlanta, repeating a common talking point among Democrats. Yet Republicans say that Georgians voted in record numbers in last year's election, including more voters of color than the 2016 election when Barack Obama was on the ballot. Earlier this year, the state registered 300,000 new voters in 10 months, while at the same time, the state also sought to move off the rolls 300,000 other voters described as inactive.
So yeah, it's reasonable to try and conform and update your voter files periodically, but you want to do it in a way that emphasizes citizens' ability to vote.
Is it reasonable to clean the voter rolls of, dead people and people who've moved out and that sort of thing?
Listen, this is a solution in search of a problem. Voter fraud through voter identification is almost non-existent.
Purging people from the rolls, that it makes no rational sense what they're doing.
So the two parties have faced off in court over this issue with a decision pending in Georgia. Meantime, both parties are devoting a lot of effort to making sure that their supporters are registered for next year's election, Cheryl.